Welcome everyone to the Yogic Studies podcast. I'm your host, Seth Powell, and this is episode 39. Today we are speaking with Dr. Lubomír Ondračka. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly.
Yeah, that's fine. That's
who
correct.
is an independent researcher and lecturer at Charles University in Prague, and who will be teaching our upcoming online course, YS 124, the Yogic Body. Lubomír, welcome to Yogic Studies.
Hello, Seth, and thanks for inviting me to teach to your program.
Absolutely. Tell us, give us a very brief introduction to yourself, just to begin, and tell us where are you right now?
In Prague. I spent all my life in Prague, in fact, except about 7 years in India, but there were just some either long trips or my studies. When I finished my Indological studies, I got a scholarship from Indian government to continue my studies in Kolkata, because my specialization was Bengali literature. So then I spent almost 3 years in Kolkata, but otherwise I am quite conservative and living in beautiful Prague.
Well, I believe the first time we met actually was in India.
It's
do you
possible.
think so? Yeah. I think if memory serves me, I think it was actually before I was even a grad student, when I was traveling with my then girlfriend, now wife. We were traveling all over northern India and going to visit various temples and ashrams, and we ended up in Himachal Pradesh at the Deer Park Institute in Bir.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
So you attended a seminar with Dr. Bettina Boime.
Exactly. I think it was on the Vijnana Bhairava, this workshop.
Okay, and it was in Deer Park.
Yes,
Institute.
At the Deer Park Institute,
okay.
which is a lovely retreat center up in the mountains.
Yeah, in the monastery. So it must be more than 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think it must have been 2010 or 11. And I remember, I knew nothing at the time, very little. But I was very interested in that text, because I was trying to get to some of these source texts of yoga. And the Vijnana Bhairava is a very interesting text which teaches, these dharanas, these methods of yogic concentration, let's say. That was actually a very interesting workshop, because we read the text and then we were actually practicing these dharanas.
Yeah.
And I can remember sitting in the monastery, but then also going out into the landscape and sitting by a rushing stream of water and reflecting. There was a particular teaching on listening to the sound of water moving, right? Things like that. But I remember you were getting into these fierce conversations with Dr. Baumer about Sanskrit particles and how to read the verses. I think you two were probably the only ones in the room who actually knew Sanskrit.
Wasn't Sadananda Das there in that time? Perhaps not.
I don't remember that. If he was, I wasn't aware of that. At the time.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I mean, all seminars led by Bettina Boime were fantastic. But you are right that Vijnana Bhairava is a special text. That's really much more practical than several other works. Yeah. And it was nice to combine the theoretical approach to the text. I mean, this very dense translating practice, and then to combine it with a real practice. Yeah, how to meditate, how to concentrate on the particular things. Yeah, that was amazing. Oh.
Yeah, since then I've come to know you quite well through many conferences and other types of academic workshops, on reading Sanskrit texts, many of these events with the haṭhayoga project. We've both been very privileged to get to attend some of these incredible reading groups. Those groups are quite different, as I think about it, than the one with Bettina ji. And both serve their purpose, certainly. But what were you doing in India at that time? Were you doing research or traveling? How did you end up at the Deer Park Institute?
I think that was It was in May. So in May you cannot do anything in India because of the weather. Oh! No, I know. Yes, it was in May, and then came one my colleague, and we went to Kashmir. In fact, it was part of one project. We were working for our teacher, specialist on Indian art, and we were documenting some really rare, remote archaeological places. So we went to Kashmir and spent about 2 weeks in Kashmir looking for various archaeological sites or remains, mostly ruins. Not much remained in Kashmir from Hindu heritage. And then we went to Ladakh. So we took a bus from Srinagar to Kargil, and from Kargil we visited all the Buddhist beautiful monasteries in Ladakh. And I have nice memories on this. That was probably the most beautiful trip in India, partly because of the mountains.
I can't remember if it was the same summer or the one prior or after, but we went up to Ladakh one of those summers
really?
as well, and we spent about 2 months there because, as you said, that's the thing to do when
yes,
the heat
exactly.
gets
What
strong.
Can you do in May or June?
Going north.
Yeah. And that was really extremely beautiful, and partly because of the mountains. They are nice, and partly because of extremely nice people there, because if you have experience from let's say Gangetic plains, it's very different if you go to the mountains. And particularly, I mean, the hospitality of Kashmiri Muslims, that was just one of my best experience in India ever. That's really, I still remember their hospitality. That was something really amazing. So I have nice memories for that.
Beautiful. It's nice to kind of reminisce and go back there. It's incredible places, and as you say, wonderful people. So let's back up a little bit. How today, I really consider you one of the, leading experts on Tantra, on the Nāth yogis, on, as we'll get into, maybe Bengali Tantric and yoga literature. One of the key scholars working in this field, on this material, let's say.
Oh, thank you.
And but this is not something one just decides to do one day. So, well, maybe. So how did you get here, Lubomír? Tell us a little bit more about your journey to becoming an Indologist in this field.
Oh, yeah. That was not a straightforward journey, because when I graduated from high school, it was in 1985, and in that time there was still a communist regime here, and although I was already in that time interested in India, but it was clear to me that it does not make any sense to study any humanities in that time, because the humanities were under so strong pressure from the communist ideology, communist regime. So I opted for chemistry. I liked chemistry, so I went to the chemical university. And I studied there mostly mathematical modeling. It was an engineering program in mathematical modeling. I enjoy it very much, and I started also in that time my interest in alchemy, in the history of chemistry, but in alchemy. So that was one line in, let's say, official line. But at the same time, I started learning Hindi at the so-called, how was it called, state language school. Yes, a state language school, and that was interesting institution. It was official institution, of course. Everything was official in that time, but there were amazing teachers there. And why amazing teachers?
Why did you choose to study Hindi? You mentioned you had an interest in India. Where did that come from?
Yes, yeah. I think that must came from reading some books of Rabindranath Tagore. If imagine if you are 15, 16 years old and you read The Gardener, and so beautiful poetry on love, and after reading a couple, particularly The Gardener, I remember this book, and other books written by Rabindranath, as we say in Bengali, Rabindranath, and in English you use Tagore, I think, like this. That sounds horrible to me. Sorry. And I fell in love with India, with Bengal. Yeah, so that was the reason that I was looking for learning some Indian language. And in that time, Hindi was available at the language school, and I was so lucky to get an amazing teacher at this school. Now he's a leading scholar in Old Hindi, Dr. Jaroslav Strnad. So from him I learned modern Hindi first, and later, much later at the university, Old Hindi and Kabir language, etc., etc. So that was before the collapse of the communist government. And in 1989, the communist regime collapsed, and at the Charles University, the Indological program started to be get a new fresh, started to be rebuilt, and I immediately joined the Indological Institute. But at that time, I was studying still the Chemical University. I was also studying nuclear physics at Charles University.
Wow.
So it was really, very, very harsh time. And I entered because in that time, that would sound quite strange to you and probably to your to the audience. In that time, we didn't have this system of 3 years BA program and 2 years MA program. That was just 5-year MA program. So I entered Indological studies. The specialization was Bengali, and it was MA 5-year program. So that's what I actually did. Yeah,
it's basically a PhD then.
No. That was, that was just 5 years of intensive language learning and some other things. But the title at the end was MA.
But did you produce a thesis?
Yes, of course. That was part of the program, and I wrote a thesis on the religion of the bowels. So already in that time, I was interested in this something yogic tantric background. So that's basically how I what I did. And how I entered the Indological studies.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I don't know, did you find once you started studying the languages, Hindi and Bengali, Sanskrit, did your chemical engineering background, did that help you in any way to attack these languages?
I don't know whether learning these languages, probably not, but to do anything else, and still I use my engineering background. When you study these hard sciences, you get some kind of thinking, of approaching problems and solving problems, and that was great advantage. And I saw it immediately when I entered these Indological studies, that in some things I'm a bit more advanced, because if you are an engineer, you know how to solve this, what to do. Yeah, it's some kind of different approach, different thinking, and it does not help much with modern languages like Hindi and Bengali. It helps a bit with classical languages, because some Sanskrit texts, they are like a rebus, you have to solve a lot of things. And that was the same with, I was also learning a Western language or Vedic Sanskrit. So perhaps it helps a bit, yeah.
Yeah. And then after the MA, though, you did carry on to doing a PhD, right?
Not exactly. I got a scholarship from the Indian government, as I already mentioned, to continue my studies in Kolkata at the Jadavpur University at the Department of Bengali. And but Indian administration. I already had an MA degree, but I was first enrolled to an MA program again. So it took me about a year to change my status there. Then they have to approve. They had to approve my title from Prague. Then I had to wait a year to get a guide, etc., etc. So after 3 years of doing officially almost nothing in Kolkata, I got a message from Prague that there is some part-time position at the Charles University at the religious department for teaching Indian religions. So I said, goodbye, Kolkata. I went back to Prague. So I didn't finish my studies in Kolkata. Okay. But they were amazing years. I learned a lot of. I mean, I didn't do anything. I mean, in the case of the research, I mean, my research program was on Bengali Nāth literature. I just collected some material. I bought a lot of books in that time, and I traveled a lot of. That was fine. So I mean, I would say these years were formative for getting my Indological background and be in touch with the living Indian traditions. Yeah. So from this point of view, these years were extremely important for my academic career, but not for doing any official things.
Yeah, I know, most of your work is textually based, and I think you probably identify mostly as a philologist. Is that right?
Yes.
But you also, right, as you're saying, you spent considerable time in India and try to supplement your textual studies with field work and engagement with living traditions. Can you speak to that a little bit more as you've gotten deeper into the tantric and kind of yogic milieus that you study?
Yeah. First, I think that's even for what I would like to stress, that even for a textual scholar, it's important to have some experience with living traditions, because even if you work on, let's say, Kalidas or something very much classical, to have an experience with the landscape, with all the smells, sounds, temples, pilgrimage places. I mean, it helps to go a bit deeper, beneath the surface of the understanding. So I would recommend to anybody to spend. I mean, it's not always very. I mean, easy or pleasure to travel in India, especially if you don't have money. And as a student, I really it was sometimes quite difficult. But back to your question on this yogic and tantric connection. In fact, it's related somehow to my chemical studies, because when I started my Indological studies, my idea was that I will concern on the history of Indian alchemy. Because I had a background in chemistry, and I was interested in Western alchemy, and I learned, okay, there is also a tradition of Indian alchemy, not only Indian, also Islamic. I mean, alchemical traditions all over the world. And that was the first thing I said at the Indological department. I said, okay, I'm a chemical engineer, and I would like to do this, and I'm learning Sanskrit, etc. And so that was my idea. But I didn't know where to start, so I approached my teacher in Bengali and Hinduism, Dr. Dushan Zbavitel, and I asked him, could you recommend me some book on Indian alchemy? And he was quite surprised and said, there is one important book, not exactly on alchemy, but there is some material on Indian alchemists. The book is written by Shashi Bhushan Dasgupta and called Obscure Religious Cults as background of Bengali literature. You probably know the book because it's still famous book. By the way, Mircea Eliade used the book heavily when writing his book on yoga. The subtitle disappeared from second edition, but if you can look at the first edition, it's really Obscure Religious Cults, and the subtitle reads as background of Bengali literature. Yeah, so it's still, very much connected to Bengali literature. Okay, and I got the book from the library at Indology Institute, started to read it. In that time, my English was, it was my first language. What was German, So reading. My first language, foreign language was Russian, of course. That was compulsory here. Yeah, but after Russian, the German. And my English was really very, very poor. So I struggled with the book. Imagine you get 400 pages, something like this. And in that book, I learned for the first time about the Siddha or Nāth tradition.
Yeah.
And Siddhas were alchemists or Nāthas Siddhas, and there were also yogis. So, and this is the starting point of my interest into, because I would like to look at these siddhas as alchemists. Oh, the book says there are also siddhas yogis, so I have to learn something about siddhas and yogis. And since then, that was the I would say the starting point. And I believe for a couple of years that I will do my research in this in the history of alchemy. So when I went to India for the first time, I bought a couple of Sanskrit texts on alchemy, and it was, I think, in 1998. Yes, when I was in Kolkata, I went trip to Delhi buying books. And on the shelf, it was in the Munshira Manoharlal office. On the shelf, I discovered a book written by David White, Alchemic Body.
Of course.
You know the book, 500 or 600 pages published by Chicago University Press. Yeah. Absolutely impressive, Yes. I opened the book.
And At the time, such a pioneering work. Right?
Yes, yeah. And I said, oh, no. I believe, up to this moment, I believe that nobody is working on Indian alchemy. And you can imagine that, oh no. 600
and that is a fat book that he dropped.
So that was the end, at the very moment, the end of my idea that I will ever do anything on Indian alchemy, because I at this moment I understand, okay, it's done. Yeah, it's done, and no way to do this. So since that moment, okay, so let's look more closely on the siddhas as yogis. Yeah. So perhaps that was the time when I started more to be more interested in haṭhayoga than in alchemy.
Yeah. Since you brought up that book, what is your impressions of that book today? I am sort of curious because of your background and because of this intersection of alchemy and yoga that you specialize in. What can we say now? However many years later, because at the time it really was groundbreaking, but we have refined our knowledge in these fields, since then, right?
I would say that the book is still impressive, and it's pleasure to read it. So, and I also know it's very influential. I mean, scholars from various parts of, various areas of research take it as an important source of information.
Not only that, some scholars ended their careers because of it. They stopped their research because of these books.
But I must say that at the same time, I'm quite critical about the book, because if you just read it for pleasure, for learning something, that's amazing. If you started to use it as a research tool, you will quite often end with dead ends, and a lot of quotations doesn't work. A lot of Sanskrit translations or Old Hindi translations are not correct or taken from the context. A lot of things made related in the book are in fact not related, etc., etc. So I still would recommend to read it, but very carefully, and not to be very critical. Read it critically. Yeah, that I would say. But still, it's I have it there on my bookshelf, and sometimes look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so then you discovered the whole world of yoga and yogis. Thank you, Das Gupta, which is another whole world to open up. And then you really did lean into the Nāth and the yoga aspect. You've written many articles and chapters, but I think one of the ones that was most influential for me is an article you wrote about the body, which is the subject, in fact, of the course that you'll be teaching.
Yes.
But conceptions of the idealized yogic body or tantric body, or there's many different phrases and types of bodies, and in fact that was one of your questions, right? What is the terminology and the language that the Nāths themselves are using in their literature? Can you say a few words about that research?
Yes, it started with the question of immortality. In fact, and again, that's connected to alchemists and to the yogis, because in alchemical text you have quite a lot of verses or paragraphs on immortality, and it's the same with early yoga texts. If you do this, you will be immortal. Do this practice, and you will be immortal. And I was always curious. Okay, and what does it exactly mean? Well, to be immortal? Immortal within this physical body, or are we talking about some kind of non-material spiritual immortality? So that was my question. And I started to, and first, of course, I looked at the secondary literature, and there was almost consensus in secondary literature that the texts talk about some kind of spiritual, non-material immortality. That's very intuitive. Okay, we have a physical body, the physical body will die, and something will survive, our soul, jiva, atman, and this is immortal. And with this knowledge of the secondary literature, I looked at these at the Sanskrit, not only Sanskrit but mainly Sanskrit yogic texts, and I discovered that what the authors in secondary literature are saying about this is not present in the text. So that was my starting point. That finally culminated in my PhD dissertation on the question of immortality in yoga, and on the road, I would say, on this journey, I was analyzing different types of bodies mentioned in text, trying to discover what they actually mean, or whether they are just mentioned, or whether there is some coherent concept behind these terms, etc., etc. So, and finally, my I mean, the result of my research was that. But when these yogic texts talk about immortality, they basically and mostly mean really physical immortality. But it's so anti-intuitive for us in our modern world. We don't believe in physical immortality. That's simple. Who will? Oh, perhaps somebody could believe in it, but it goes against our empirical life. Everybody will die. At least it seems so. So that was the trajectory and the journey, that I met different kind of bodies in yogic texts, and since then I developed my interest in this topic, and it continues. I must say.
And so, is this related then to the concept of Jivan Mukta or Jivan Mukti?
Partly, because yes, we have a concept of a yogi who is at the same time liberated and at the same time living in his physical body, and so this is basically the concept of Jivan Mukta, being liberated but still living, but the part, not in all texts, but in various texts, the part of this liberation and of this yogic kind of liberation is that the yogi is some kind of deity. He's so powerful. He's beyond material world, beyond any prakritic world. So he can do, because what's our body? That's I mean, the physical body. It's material. It's just bhautika deha. It's composed of mahabhutas, of gross elements.
Yeah.
And if you are really realized yogi or liberated yogi, you can do with the material world anything you want. And that's for example, I mean, the reason of or the background of all these siddhis, these extraordinary powers. You are not limited by what would we call some natural laws or something like this. A yogi could fly, he can go through the rock. I mean, he's not limited by the outsider phenomenal world.
Yeah. A couple things coming to mind. One is that, something I looked at in my dissertation on these medieval yoga traditions in South India, yoga, tantra, bhakti, the ways in which the hatha yogi, in particular the Nāth yogi, with this emphasis on perfecting the body, gets criticized, gets chastised by the bhakta, by the the Shaiva devotee or the worshipper of Vishnu. This focus on the material, or at least that's how it's characterized. There's this excessive focus on bodily practice, bodily perfection, that they're somehow being ensnared further in the illusion of the world. Of course, this is coming from a tradition outside and giving sort of a caricature, an exaggerated view, but one could see how maybe there is this repeated emphasis on the body, on bodily practice. I don't know if any thoughts that come to mind about this disparity between bhakti and
about this in my course, because what you just mentioned, it's in fact the mainstream of Indian approaches to the body. Body is just something material, and we don't care for the material. We care for our soul, for Atman, for the liberation, and moreover, body is impure, etc., etc. So that's the mainstream, not only of Brahmanical thought, but also of Bhakti traditions. I mean, the majority of, not all of them, but the majority of Bhakti traditions. And yoga, or it started with tantric approach to the body. Tantra and yoga made quite revolutionary change in this approach to the body. Yeah, that's clear. Yeah, and it's still visible in India today. You know, I mean, the mainstream, what you mentioned, presented by the Bhakti traditions. That's what the majority of tradition would follow. You know, I mean, you should not care for body. That's something material, something impure. Yeah, that's.
Yeah, and that's something quite then unique about the Hatha Yoga tradition. Really, is its cultivation of the body.
Yes, yeah.
So when we talk about, let's talk about the subject of this course, which is titled the Yogic Body. Well, we could have titled it many different things, I think, to talk about this material, and it's an interesting phrase, the Yogic Body. Sometimes in my own writing, I pause to think about how do I want to talk about this thing, this sort of network of phenomena that I'm going to then talk about. Sometimes we use the terms, or you see subtle body, or the tantric body, or metaphysical body. I don't know. Talk to me a little bit about your thinking about this phrase, the yogic body, etc.
Yeah, I must say that I was a bit surprised when I learned that you call the course the yogic body, yeah, making the impression that there is some coherent, unique concept of the yogic body, and you perhaps notice that I purposely called my modules, courses, always with a plural, bodies.
Yes.
Indian bodies, tantric bodies, yogic bodies.
Yes.
And
we
of course,
we should have titled the course Yogic Bodies.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, that now will be I think, from pedagogical purpose, it's fine to show. Okay, we are talking about the yogic body, but let's have a look at the reality, and what we will see is extreme diversity of bodies, and that's what I would like to stress in my course, that even though we use all these terms in singular, in tantric body, yogic body, when we look at the material, we will see, I mean, as I said, extreme diversity of concepts, approaches, terms. So and that's natural for any. I mean, that's not special for this topic. It's natural, as you know, and as an Indologist, you know very well that this huge diversity. It's natural for all Indian material. If you look at anything, you will. It's also why it's so difficult to teach anything about India, because to say something that would really be true for 100% of situation is almost impossible. Yeah, you always must do some generalization, etc., etc. Yeah. So in the case of the body, I'm fine with all these terms like yogic body, tantric body, even subtle, but I mean, we need to understand each other. We need to describe the material. So I am fine with all these terms, in the case that we somehow clearly define them, and then that's fine, So I even the term subtle body, that's not used in yogic texts. I mean, extremely rarely. If you check your yogic text, I mean, let's say at least the early Hatha Yoga text, how many instances of some sukshma sharira, sukshma deha, or linga sharira? 2, 3, 5, maybe. Yeah, that's not the term used by this tradition.
Yeah.
It's used by tantric texts, but it means something very different from our understanding of subtle body. Because when we say, or at least I believe that's the case in modern yoga environment, when we say subtle body or tantric body, we mean usually the body with all these chakras, kuṇḍalaṇīs, granthis, nadis, etc. Yeah, but in Sanskrit text, when you use the term subtle body, sukshma sharira, sukshma deha, linga sharira, it's in fact vehicle of the soul. I mean, sometimes it's called ashtapuri, as you probably know. I mean, that's just the vahana, vehicle of atman or jiva, and it consists of buddhi, ahamkara, manas, and some tanmatras, and so on. So it's very different things from how we use the term subtle body nowadays, or even scholars use it in this meaning as a tantric body with all these chakras, nadis, etc. But as I said, I don't have problem with using all these terms when you define them. And if I say, okay, by subtle body I mean this, I sometimes use the term tantric, but I put it in commas, tantric physiology and tantric anatomy.
Yeah.
It's also possible, one of the synonyms of all these terms. So now we can use them, all these terms.
So let's talk a little bit more about what comprises a yogic or a tantric body. What are you mentioned some of these terms already: chakras, ādhāras, kuṇḍalaṇī. Are these things that arise out of the tantric traditions that then make their way into yoga? Or tell us a little bit about what is shaping this model and view of the body, and how does it shape, and affect practice for a yogi or a sadhaka?
Yes. As you know, almost everything that yoga texts say about these elements within the body that we call subtle body or yogic body is inherited from tantric traditions, from various tantric traditions, and it also means that we have different concepts in yogic texts, and that's the point that sometimes puzzles yoga practitioners. Okay, so how many chakras we have? How many granthis?
I meant to ask you on the podcast. Tell us officially, how many chakras are there, Lubomír?
You could come back to this question.
We need the definitive answer.
But the general answer is, I mean, of course, I mean, in different yoga texts come from different traditions, and they have different ideas, different concepts. So there is no right answer, no correct answer, no correct concept. And again, if somebody have experience from living Indian traditions nowadays, it's what's happening today. I mean, what I usually say to my students, what's the correct answer? What's the truth? I would say is what the guru says, and that's all. that's the point. And we see this fact in our text. I mean, one text is saying this, another text is saying this, because that was a lineage of Guru Shishya Parampara, and that's what counts, and you don't care whether, I mean, of course, later pundits who make some encyclopedia encyclopedias of these or compendias of these texts, they were, for them it was a problem. Okay, why one text says this and another text says is saying this, but otherwise the plurality of concepts is natural, and the part of the story is that the yoga texts inherited all these concepts from different tantric traditions. So we have to thank tantric authors that we can talk about chakras, nadis, and all these concepts in yoga.
Yeah, and you'll of course get into this in much more detail in the course, and as you mentioned, these concepts and ideas are very much text and tradition specific, right? There are different systems and maps of chakras and ādhāras and so forth that really vary quite widely. But if you could just say briefly, like, what function and purpose do they serve within a system of yoga practice?
Again, it depends on the text. You know, if you look, I mean, probably chakras are the best example and most and so famous in yoga. Really, I was, when I started to teach yoga teachers about 10 or 12 years ago, I was surprised why are they almost obsessed with chakras, because
but they're not actually, they're obsessed with chakras. Chakras.
And yes, and because when you look at our haṭhayoga corpus, the majority of texts do not mention any chakras. You know, that's particularly the early texts. When you have chakras, I mean, very few texts have them. And not even Hatha Pradipika. And Hatha Pradipika was the compendium that tried to get the material from various traditions. And
why do you think that is? Because it did seem to be more prevalent in tantric texts. And then
but
there are
Hatha
things.
Pradipika has a lot of tantric material.
Exactly.
I mean, all these mudras,
exactly.
mudra, for example.
So any sense of why they were omitted?
That's always some kind of speculation. Why is something not present in Hatha Pradipika? But my usual understanding is that Svatmarama really tried to include a material that was acceptable for the majority of traditions. And when he felt that something would be too controversial or to align for some important traditions, he did not include it. Perhaps, we don't have access to Svatmarama's mind and the strategy how he composed Hatha Pradipika. But of course, it's surprising because Kuṇḍalaṇī is there. And very much, I mean, Kuṇḍalaṇī is strongly present in Hatha Pradipika. And it's a good example that you can have Kuṇḍalaṇī without chakras. And you can have chakras without Kuṇḍalaṇī. It's really complex. Yeah. So I really what I wanted to say. I was surprised why modern practitioners are so eager to learn and to understand chakra systems and why are different chakra systems, when the majority of classical or early Hatha Yoga texts do not mention them at all.
And neither does the Yoga Sutra, really.
Of course, yeah.
Or the Bhagavad Gita, those are really the key. And if you think of a kind of corpus for modern yoga in terms of yoga philosophy that one would study at a teacher training and so forth, there's really very little mention.
Yes,
and in fact, it's really, Sir Arthur Avalon, Woodruff, they might supplement with this book, Shat chakra. What is
Yes,
it? Nirupana.
Nirupana, yeah. I believe that all discourse about chakras in modern yoga is highly influenced by the Theosophical Society and the Theosophy writings, and of course it's connected with John Woodruff translation of the Shat chakra Nirupana that became extremely popular within this theosophy milieu, and then it was took up by the New Age authors. So you can see from the 60s how chakras entered the world of modern yoga, but in the form that was very syncretistic and adding a lot of new material. And in fact, there is one nice book on this history.
Yes,
I
I
think
can see it on my shelf. Right,
Rainbow Body.
Body, right here.
Yeah, great.
Kurt Leyland.
And
Yeah,
it really explains
it's
well
great.
the
Yeah.
trajectory of how chakras in modern yoga became chakras in modern yoga. So that's really.
And is that something that will be taken up in the course, or is it really more focused on the
No,
pre-modern
I think that
conceptions of the body?
I can prepare a separate course on chakras if you want,
of course.
to trace them from the early tantric, not so early because Kubjika Mata is perhaps the first tantric text that works with chakras. And again, it would be nice to demonstrate the function of chakras in this Kaula tradition, this Kubjika tradition, because it's very different from later function, later purpose of tantras. Because the chakras in these early texts, they were first of all, they were created during the tantric visualization or meditation. I think that's one of the most important difference between the concept of chakras in tantric milieu and in yoga texts and yogic understanding, because the tantrika creates everything within his body. Creates it does not. I mean that all these things are present there. It's part of the meditation, of the visualization, of the so-called bhavana. And these early chakras are some energy centers of mostly female deities with various powers, and they help with the practice. And it's quite different concept from the later chakras in yoga, because later chakras in yoga are much more connected to the concept of granthis in tantric texts. You have 5 granthis that you have to pierce. This chakra bheda or chakra cheda. You have to pierce the granthis, and sometimes the granthis are related to chakras, but it's different concepts. So it's quite complex, but it would be nice to trace the history of these chakras, starting from the early presence in Kubjika corpus, and then later up to the let's say classical haṭhayogic text. So it's not. My point is that you ask about the function of these chakras. Again, there is no one answer. You have to be tradition sensitive or text sensitive. I say, okay, in this tradition it means this and this, and you can work with. But mostly, of course, I mean, in yogic texts, when the chakras are part of the practice, when prana or kuṇḍalaṇī goes up, and you have to go through them, again, pierce them, like the granthis in some tantric texts.
Yeah, in Shiva Yoga Pradipika, which teaches 9 chakras, they're featured in the dhyana section of Ashtanga Yoga, and so the function is to, as you said, it's a meditative visualization in a seated posture after asana and pranayama and pratyahara. Then it's dhyana and then dharana. The order is reversed in Shiva Yoga Pradipika. So
that sounds very tantric. Yeah.
Yeah, as you were just talking, I was thinking, maybe even more tantric than I was realizing. There are other tantric dimensions of the text as well. Well, wonderful. Well, as we start to wind down here, because I think we're getting to the end here, I would like to look ahead to the course itself. We've just launched enrollment actually this week. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Oops. Oh, can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Whoops. Let's go there. Okay.
Yeah.
So the course, the Yogic Body, which will run live July 3rd through July 28th, 2023. If you're watching this later, everything's been recorded. It's all still available, and you can take this anytime. You can go online to yogicstudies.com/ys-124 to learn more and watch a lovely video with Lubomír giving an introduction to the course. But for our audience right now, maybe you could just tell us very briefly here about the 4 modules and what students can expect and to take away from this course.
Yes, I have an ambition to present the concept of body, and particularly, of course, yogic body, in a historical perspective. So first, I would like to show what we are talking about at the beginning of our talk, the general approach to the body in Indian settings, not only Hindu but also Buddhist or Jaina, and to demonstrate that the general approach was rather negative, and making, with the exception of some traditions like Kama Shastra, for example, or medicine, classical medicine, of course. And having this background, we will better understand how revolutionary was tantrism when tantric traditions made physical body as a tool for spiritual goals. That was something really very unusual. We didn't talk much about the concept of the purity or impurity. I just mentioned a few times, but the general approach in India is that the physical body is impure, and because everything what goes from the body is impure. And the tantrics, and particularly the non-dual tantric traditions, say, okay, we don't have any categories pure and impure. Everything is just one. It's just Shiva consciousness or something like this. So in the second module, I will demonstrate this very new approach to the body, and how the physical body suddenly could be made as a tool in the practice. And then we will go to the third module, yogic bodies. And again, notice that I always use the plural. I explained why, because, and we talk about this, because we have always the plurality of traditions, plurality of texts. And here in the third module, we will analyze different types of yogic bodies mentioned in the texts, and demonstrate that in general, if we can say something general, then that would be the concept of perfecting the body, making the physical body perfect, and that would mean that the body gets some extraordinary powers, Yeah, that's what we were talking about. Such a yogi is beyond the material world. It's when you go up, you can. It's a hierarchical system. You are going up and up and up, and everything what's beneath you can control. You are master of it. So if you are above the material world, it means that you can control all the material world, and you can do anything within the material world. Yeah. So that would, and of course, and we will in both the second and the third module, we will talk about all these elements that we are talking in our podcast. I mean, these chakras, kuṇḍalaṇī, nadis, what's their, let's say, physiology, if I may say, or anatomy, and the function and the purpose what they are doing, and why we have these different systems. Just you mentioned that Shiva Yoga Pradipika has 9 chakras, and more common system is 6 chakras or 6 plus 1, yeah, etc. And in the last module, we will just continue our search for the goal of yoga practice, and we will see that in not all, but majority of texts of classical Hatha Yoga or early Hatha Yoga, this goal is liberated yogi, Jivan Mukti that you mentioned, but liberated within the physical body. And that sounds very, very strange or anti-intuitive for us. Yeah, and as I mentioned, that was the research question of my PhD project. So I will share in this last talk some results, of course, very briefly, because what can you say in 90 minutes? But some important results of my research. What does it mean, immortality, and how to reach it? Yeah, how to reach it? What techniques within described in yogic texts can be used for this goal? Yeah, and mostly we will talk about the nectar of immortality. Yeah. That's amarta. Yeah, that's the key term, I would say, for this last talk.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Lubomír, for this fascinating conversation, getting to learn more about your background and wonderful research. We're so excited to have you teach this course for us. So for those listeners, if this is a topic of interest, if you want to understand the pre-modern tradition and conceptions, many different conceptions of the bodies, plural, that one can encounter, and to better understand how the modern practice situates within these pre-modern yogic traditions and tantric traditions. This course will be really important and hopefully very eye-opening for you. So thank you again to our guest, Lubomír, and
thanks for inviting me for this podcast and for the course. I'm really very much looking forward to teach it, because as you know, I really love teaching. I would say I have passion for teaching, and whenever I can share anything that I believe is interesting for the audience, it's always rewarding me. So that's really pleasure for me to have an audience that's interested in the topic that I'm going to talk about.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, and thanks to everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, goodbye. Thanks.